We tested him for everything. We tested him for bacterial overgrowth. I tried FODMAPs. He probably has SIBO. Was negative. I'm like, oh, it's probably a sucrose intolerance. Check that, negative. Then I went back to his food diary and he said mussels that he made himself at home. So I'm like, okay, these are mussels, like very specific food. He said he was sick as hell. He made them himself. So we know there wasn't any gluten in them. What is specific about mussels? And I come across that mussels are high in nickel. So then I kind of look at the rest of his food triggers through the lens of nickel. But then I see that his day-to-day diet was also really high, and like arugula salads with canned tuna was like a staple for him. Like, oh my God, that's nickel and nickel. And so I was like, you know what? Let's try this guy on a low nickel diet. And within like 3 days, his GI was perfect.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I can't wait to share with you what's in store for today. So if you've ever felt like IBS symptoms like bloating and pain aren't getting better with traditional management strategies, and low FODMAP foods seem to make your IBS type symptoms worse, you're going to want to tune in to today's episode. IBS is considered a functional gut disorder, meaning that it doesn't show up on routine testing. So while your symptoms are valid, they can overlap with other conditions that can go misdiagnosed. Today, we're talking about the link between Systemic Nickel Allergy Syndrome, SNAS for short, and IBS. We don't know exactly how common this overlap is yet, but it's probably occurring in more people with IBS than we think. A good clue is that you may react to many low FODMAP foods like walnuts, leafy greens, kale and spinach, and brown rice. For those of you listening, even if you're managing IBS well with low FODMAP, don't tune out just yet. You'll still get some value from today's episode where we uncover more about why chemical and metal sensitivities like histamine, salicylates, or sulfites can occur in IBS and evidence-based strategies to address the underlying causes. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Tamara Freuman, MSRD CSDH, is a New York City-based registered dietitian with 15 years of experience in clinical gastroenterology practice settings, specializing in the dietary management of digestive symptoms and disease. She holds a master's degree in clinical nutrition from New York University and completed her undergraduate education at Duke University. Tamara is nationally known health writer and the author of 2 books, The Bloated Belly Whisperer, 2018, and Regular, 2023, which have been translated into 5 languages and published in over a dozen countries worldwide. Without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Tamara Freuman about the nickel allergy and IBS connection. Hello, Tamara. Welcome to the show. I'm super excited to chat with you today about nickel allergy, and I think it came at an interesting time. I was actually dealing with a couple clients who were reacting to a lot of like low FODMAP foods, brown rice, spinach, peanuts, and also had diagnosed nickel allergy. And then I found your amazing article on the FODMAP Everyday website where you talked about this is something that you're noticing more in practice. And I thought, okay, this is something that we need to talk about and bring a bit more awareness to, because I think it, as you will probably discuss, that it's going unrecognized, but something that I think needs to be addressed more in the IBS population.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to talk about it.
Just to get started, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your educational background, and really what got you into focusing on gastroenterology as a clinical dietitian?
Sure. So I have been a registered dietitian for almost 16 years, 15 and a half years. And the entire time of my dietetics career, I've worked in a gastroenterology practice. So GI is what I've always wanted to do since I became a dietitian, and I specialized immediately right out of school. So it's pretty much what I live, eat, and breathe. Dietetics is my second career. So I went back to school when I was about 30. So, you do the math. And, I didn't know that I wanted to do GI necessarily off the bat, but probably like a year and a half into my studies, it really kind of captured my interest and my attention. And so I do have a master's in clinical nutrition from NYU and recently got the new board certification as a certified digestive health specialist, the CSDH. So I'm really excited to be one of the first GI specialized dietitians, that first cohort to hold that board certification. I encourage all other GI dietitians to go out there and get it. So yeah, so GI is kind of my life.
Okay, awesome. Can I ask what your career was before
Oh
dietetics?
gosh, what wasn't it? I had a few careers before. I had worked in management consulting, and then I worked for a Fortune 500 retailer doing sort of marketing and brand development, and just kind of realized during my quarter life crisis that just corporate life wasn't my passion.
Yeah, and then you thought you wanted to go into healthcare, helping people more around
Yeah,
food
I
and
mean, I was
nutrition.
turning 30 around the time that I was kind of realizing that it wasn't my interest. And, just from a personal perspective, having lived a very high travel, long hours kind of lifestyle, just realizing like, hey, like I'm hitting like a big transition in my own life and I want to start just taking better care of myself.
Mhm.
So, I started exercising routinely for the first time really in my adult life, and starting to become very interested in like my eating and diet. And so I would literally just like go to Barnes and Noble and buy like the randomest books about nutrition. And when I actually look back and think about what books I was reading, I'm like horrified because these are not the kinds of authors whose advice I would actually follow now, but I didn't know. And I was just really interested in learning about food and nutrition. And around like Sunday, 3 o'clock, I would have to shut down my weekend reading and open up my email and check my voicemails and get ready for my work week. And just kind of had this epiphany, literally just on a Sunday afternoon in May or something, that maybe there's jobs where you get to actually read and think about the nutrition stuff. And maybe that could be a career. And a few Google searches later, I'm online learning that there is a job called a registered dietitian and looking at programs in New York City and seeing what you would study and just realizing like, oh, I would want to take that class. That looks really interesting. And kind of over the course of several hours on a Sunday afternoon, kind of realized that that was going to be my next path.
Awesome. And I guess you haven't looked back since then. Don't miss the other
I mean, I
aspects.
miss the paychecks, but I don't miss the lifestyle, and I find my work very satisfying. If I had wanted to be rich, I would have stayed in the corporate world. I wanted to be satisfied. I wanted good challenges. I wanted to help people. I wanted to really engage with problem solving and mystery solving and tangibly helping people feel better and be healthier. So I find my work immensely satisfying.
Awesome. And currently you work at a outpatient gastroenterology clinic. Can you
Yeah,
explain
I
more?
work in, yeah, I work for New York Gastroenterology Associates. We are the largest independent GI practice in New York City. It's physician owned. There's 23, soon to be 24 GI doctors and two of us dietitians. And I don't even know how I would practice not in a GI setting. I've been doing it for so long. I find it's so much easier to be effective at my job when I have physicians who know me, who trust my judgment, who are willing, if I think that something medically could be going on based on what I'm hearing diet and food wise, that they're willing to order a test, and they're willing to even prescribe certain medications if I can make a case for it based on what I'm seeing with the diet and symptom recall. And
Mm.
so to be able to have that partnership, that collaboration makes me able to help my patients more. And I work with a lot of dietitians. I do clinical supervision and, I have colleagues who are on their own. And I see the frustrations that a lot of my colleagues are up against when they have an idea about something and a suspicion, but they don't have the clinical privileges to order testing or to diagnose or to treat, and they need that partnership that can sometimes be really elusive. And so, this idea of integrated care and multimodal care, I think gets patients better. And you know, I'm really, really privileged to be working in that environment.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And your patients must get really good care from you. So that's awesome.
I
Um,
mean, they get the best that I can offer, right? Like I'm not like 100%. I can't help every single person. And sometimes it's very frustrating when I can't help someone, but I do think that my track record is better than it would be if I were practicing on my own.
yeah, yeah, that's fair enough. And I think you missed something in your introduction, but you're also well known for a couple books. So the original was The Bloated Belly Whisperer, which I think is very well known, I think, amongst the public population, people looking to improve their gut health. But I know a lot of dietitian colleagues have read it as well. And then you just recently, was it last year,
It
published
was
in.
already 2023. It was April 2023. I published my second book. I know, time flies. And that book is called Regular. It's not as well known, but in many ways, I think it's better. And that really just focuses on kind of chronic diarrhea and chronic constipation,
Mhm.
um, and the many medical causes that can underlie those, and the various dietary remedies depending on their etiologies. And I think it's a sleeper, that one. I think it's a great resource. I'm really, really proud of it. It didn't get as much traction, but I'm really proud of it. It's a good one.
Mhm. Awesome. Cool. So, just getting into the topic for today, talking about nickel allergy. I know when we were discussing the idea for this podcast, I think a few weeks ago, you said that it's something that you've been noticing more in practice and catching it more often.
Yeah.
And in your article, you mentioned there was like a landmark, I think it was a pilot study in 2017. So this is not entirely new. Like this has been something that's been researched for a while. Can you just share more about maybe the first time you remember sort of noticing this in practice?
Well,
Yeah.
I think, reflecting back, I probably came across it before I recognized it, right? Like I'm thinking back to an IBS patient who, in retrospect, probably didn't have IBS, who told me years ago the strangest thing, which was oatmeal makes her profoundly sick, but if she cooks it in like extra, like triple the water that it calls for, like extra water, she can tolerate it. And what I've learned, and my kind of guiding principle with my patients, is I believe the patient's report always of what they experience. I just always question the reason that they attribute it to, because it's usually wrong. Like people know what they feel, people know what they experience. You are the expert of your own experiences. Who am I to tell you feel you don't feel something?
Yeah.
But usually they're then looking on the internet and coming up with some idea about the why, and that's usually wrong. I don't remember what she attributed it to. And at the time, I couldn't attribute it to anything except that, look, she found a way that she's able to eat this food. Great, eat the food. But that always stuck with me as this like weird thing that I could not account for and I couldn't explain it. And it wasn't until probably several years later where I learned about nickel allergy and what foods were high nickel and some of the cooking techniques that can kind of leach nickel out of foods that I remembered this patient. I wish I could remember her name, and I was like, I bet that this woman had a nickel allergy. And so that's kind of how like it all kind of started coming together. Um, when I don't, God, how did I even learn about nickel? I mean, I'm always very interested in unusual, like the food mysteries, right? Like
Yeah.
whenever someone has like really specific foods that like trigger them that are unusual, when someone tells you that they feel worse on a low FODMAP diet, or someone who, has celiac disease and they go gluten free and their GI symptoms get worse, not better, when they start eating more gluten free grains and gluten free foods.
Hmm.
And you go through your diet and like, okay, it's not gluten. And you check their antibodies and the antibodies are negative. Like their scopes are clear. Like this isn't refractory celiac disease. And so they're just told like, oh, you have IBS overlay. But why is the IBS worse on your gluten free diet? And people will always just assume erroneously, like, oh, I must be getting glutened. I'm so sensitive. Oh, I remember. This is the guy. It was a guy with celiac disease who assumed that he was the most sensitive person in the world, that he was getting glutened everywhere he went. He could not eat outside the house. He said he couldn't even drink water at a bar because he's like, every time I even drink out of a glass at a bar, I'm getting glutened. And my belly blows up, like swells, horrible pain, all these, crazy symptoms, GI wise, diarrhea. And I'm like, there's just no way that like the all of these things that you think are gluten. And we tested him for everything. We tested him for bacterial overgrowth. It wasn't that. I tried FODMAPs because he said, oh, beans made him sick as hell. And so I was like, oh, well, it's, probably FODMAPs. He probably has SIBO. Was negative. I'm like, oh, it's probably a sucrose intolerance. Check that. Negative. Like we worked this guy up and down. Couldn't figure it out. And I went back to his food diary and I, kind of went back to some of the foods that he had experienced making him really, really sick. And he said mussels that he made himself at home. So I'm like, okay, these are mussels. Like very specific food. Not a lot of people eat mussels. He said he was sick as hell. He made them himself. So we know there wasn't any gluten in them. why would mussels? Then I started looking at all the food lists. Like, what are mussels high in? Like, what is specific about mussels? And I'm checking all like the food allergy list and the food sensitivity list, and I come across that mussels are high in nickel. So then I kind of look at the rest of his food triggers through the lens of nickel. And I realize he reacts horribly to nuts, which are high nickel. He reacts horribly to beans, which are high nickel. But then I see that his day-to-day diet was also really high, and like arugula salads with canned tuna was like a staple for him. Like, oh my God, that's nickel and nickel. And so I was like, you know what? Let's try this guy on a low nickel diet. And within like 3 days, his GI was perfect. And so that was the first time that, like, in my clinical practice, that I actually put the pieces together. And I really stumbled into it. Like, I was looking at all the other things before I kind of understood what I was really looking at. And then once I came across that with this one patient, then I started educating myself about what is this allergy? What are these foods? Who is more likely to have it? And I saw that people with celiac disease who are, sort of non-responsive to a gluten-free diet symptomatically, may, be, worked up and evaluated for nickel, understanding that systemic nickel allergy syndrome can be a really close IBS mimicker. A lot of the symptoms look very similar to IBS. And once you
Mhm.
start to know what it is, then you can start to find it, right? Like, once you know what you're looking for, then you find it. And I would say I probably now will suspect or come across a case maybe like once every 4 to 6 weeks in my practice, which
Interesting.
is not nothing. I mean, it's not nothing. I mean, this is a GI practice, so this is obviously a population that has a lot of GI symptoms, but
Mhm.
that's not nothing.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Wow. Can you explain a little more about what like the condition is? So I think the full condition where it actually affects GI symptoms, digestion
Yeah.
is SANS, systemic
Yeah.
nickel
I don't
allergy.
know how we say it. SNAS, SNAS, I don't know. Um, so nickel allergy is pretty widespread in terms of the contact dermatitis. In other words, people who are sensitized to get, you know, localized rashes on their skin when they wear cheap jewelry is pretty common. I mean, in certain populations in Western Europe, for example, I mean, the estimates are even like up to 20% of the population are sensitized. So it's a fairly common dermatological allergy. This is not an IgE mediated allergy. This is not the same as like a peanut allergy or soy allergy. In other words, it's not mediated by IgE antibodies. And so if you take a blood test and check for like allergy, you can't check for nickel allergy through a blood test because it is not
Hmm.
IgE mediated. You're not going to see elevated IgE to nickel. It is a lymphocyte mediated contact dermatitis. And so the way that you have to diagnose it is with patch testing, where they leave a patch on your skin for 3 days, and if you have a rashy, whatever, then that's the diagnosis. Now, a small percentage of people who have allergic contact dermatitis to nickel seem also to have another layer, which is a contact mucositis, meaning that when the mucosa of your GI tract, in other words, your mouth, your intestinal lining, have contact with nickel, then they can also have an inflammation, kind of like dermatitis on your mucosa, right? So, like, think about in your mouth, for example, you might have like,
Mouth
irritation,
allergies.
yeah, like in your inside your mouth, but
Okay.
also in the lining of your GI tract, your
Hmm.
bowels.
Hmm.
And that would be again on contact with high nickel foods. The only estimate of prevalence I have seen so far is from some Italian study.
Right.
And they're estimating that maybe about 5% of people who have contact dermatitis to nickel might also have the systemic nickel allergy syndrome, where eating high nickel foods will provoke internal sort of GI symptoms.
Hmm.
So 5% of people who have the skin condition may actually also react to high nickel food. So again, this is not like a hugely prevalent thing. Even if you're allergic to nickel and you get rashes, it's very unlikely, statistically probably, that you're going to react to high nickel foods.
Mhm.
However, if you're suffering from chronic GI issues and you've been treated up and down for IBS and you don't get better on any of the medications or any of the diets, and you have some kind of interesting and somewhat unique symptoms of nickel, you know, nickel allergy, then maybe you could be one of the 5%, you know?
Hmm. Do you think that maybe if someone also had a pre-existing autoimmune condition like celiac disease is that might increase their risk of
Maybe.
having it?
So I don't
Maybe.
so I don't know if there are any estimates of whether nickel allergy is more prevalent in celiac disease. I've never seen any studies that would suggest that it is, but
Okay.
I've seen a couple of very small studies that suggested that patients who are having ongoing IBS like symptoms,
Hmm.
even after adopting a gluten-free diet, who maybe would have been told that they either have an IBS overlay or they have refractory celiac disease, even though
Hmm.
there's mucosal healing and their antibodies are normal,
Right.
that, when you screen those patients for nickel and put the people who have a positive skin test on a low nickel diet,
Mm.
so like 80% or more of them resolve. So I think that it may be an under-recognized cause for persistent symptoms in celiac. I just don't know if people with celiac are more or less likely to have it than the general population. I don't think anyone studied
Hmm.
that.
Yeah, we could only maybe assume, but yeah, we don't know for sure.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't assume anything. I don't know.
All right. And then I think the interesting part too is that a lot of the, as you said, the high nickel foods are low FODMAP. So spinach, leafy greens, brown rice, quinoa,
Certain leafy greens, yeah, not
legumes,
all, but
even low
certain
FODMAP.
ones.
Yeah, but often those are like higher fiber foods. So if someone's, trying to follow low FODMAP and then include more of the plant-based foods that are higher fiber that they know they've heard is good for their GI tract, and yet symptoms get worse, that might be an interesting clue to pay
Yeah,
attention.
definitely. Like like a lot of the gluten-free grains, like, buckwheat and oats. And I mentioned arugula earlier and spinach. Although if you boil spinach in a lot of water, then it all of a sudden becomes a lot less lower nickel.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of low FODMAP foods that are high nickel, and there's a lot of high FODMAP foods that are low nickel. And so again, if you're not better from an IBS perspective on a low FODMAP diet, you've got to look elsewhere.
Right. And if someone's experiencing these symptoms, not feeling better, and they haven't been tested for nickel allergy, I know the options you mentioned are the patch test. If someone doesn't have access to that right away, is there another way that they could
I
potentially,
mean, look, you're
you know?
not going to harm yourself by putting yourself on a 2 week low nickel diet. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like the nice thing about diets and GI symptoms is within 2 weeks if it's helping or not.
Mhm.
So there are plenty of nutritious low nickel foods. My caution to my patients who want to try this is usually when they come to me, they're already on a low FODMAP diet that somebody else has put them on or they put themselves on.
Mhm.
And they're really already kind of like afraid of FODMAPs because their brain has been told that these are the bad food.
Yeah.
I will not work with a patient who's not going to liberalize the FODMAPs. Like I will not work with you if you're going to insist on saying low FODMAP and low nickel.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not going to work for us. If we want to test
Really.
whether your problem is nickel, then I need you to eat the full expression of a low nickel diet, including FODMAPs, because we need to prove that the issue is nickel and not FODMAPs.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle because, the elimination diet lens and the elimination diet culture has really done a number on a lot of our chronic GI patients
Yeah.
where they eliminate something, they don't get better, but then they're not willing to put that back in. So then all these elimination diets become incremental.
Yeah.
And the low nickel diet is a very extensive set of eliminations. This is not a diet that I'm willing to layer on to others.
Mm-hmm.
So, because for example, with a low nickel diet, there's only a couple of grains that you can have, and one of them is white flour.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not like if you're going to go gluten free and, like that's not going to work. Like I need to know that you can have low nickel grains because nickel's your problem. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I will work with patients who want to do this empirically without allergy testing, but not as like the third or fourth elimination layer.
Yeah. Makes sense for sure. Puts them at risk for a lot of nutrient deficiencies too.
Well, and also just eating disorders. I mean, like
Sure.
everyone these days is like has like ARFID, like avoidant restrictive food intake
Mm-hmm.
disorder type of vibes, after having been through the ringer with a doctor, even a well-meaning doctor who's like, oh, go gluten-free, dairy-free, low FODMAP. And then and then somebody else, a functional person put them on like a food sensitivity testing and told them to eliminate a dozen other things. And, often by the time they get to
Or they
me,
spend a day on TikTok and
yeah. So the diets are just getting smaller and smaller, and the fears and the anxiety around reintroducing is really, really high.
yeah.
Um, so it's hard, like sometimes you need to do an elimination diet to see what's going on, but you want to
Mhm.
be so cautious to not give somebody an eating disorder.
Totally. Yeah. And sometimes we know too, like even just they may have anxiety or stress about trying a new food, and then that can impact gut brain, messaging connection, and then even contribute to symptoms in that case where it wasn't necessarily the food, but it was more just the
The
anxiety
anticipation.
or the stress. Yeah. The anticipatory reaction. So a lot to tease out, but yeah. I guess in terms of like low nickel diet, I think there's a lot of, well, would say maybe there's a lack of information, but would you agree that it's a little hard to tease out like an exact list of what low nickel foods are just because there may be different like preparation even within food types or how the where the food is grown, like nickel content of the soil.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, this is the same thing that we also encounter with other kind of food chemical stuff, like histamines are another example. You're never going to get a perfect, precise, exact low nickel diet list because food is grown in different soil and also food is grown in different countries with different pollutants in the air,
Yeah.
right? And like nickel is also an environmental pollutant. And so, depending on where a food is grown can have a huge impact on how much nickel is in it. And so, and that's what's really tricky is that like patients will go online, they'll see this list says that food is high and that list says it's low, and it's so confusing. And that, yeah, and that's just how this category is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we have to sort of set some expectations with our patients that like there's not a ton of precision in this space.
Mm-hmm.
We generate our list based on the best available information, which is decent for nickel.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start there. And if there's a food that my list says is low nickel, but you really react badly to it, okay, so we're not going to eat that food. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's a food that my list says is moderate or even high, and you feel that you can eat that without problem, great. You get that food back. Like the food list on paper is not the Bible, it's the starting point. Your body is the Bible, right? Your body tells us ultimately what the food list is going to be. The list we start with is probably going to be 80 to 90% accurate, and then we tweak. Um, I would say, as far as the available data, there's some decent published research on sort of empirical measurements of nickel in foods.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is for most of the studies, they are single samples,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like, okay, the sample that they used showed that, this food was high. Ideally, what you'd want to really be developing a food list around as a dietitian is, do we have access to a database where they've looked at all the different studies that measure that food and recorded all the levels and kind of done a weighted average or something.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a database like that in existence. It's called Rebelytics with a
Okay, I was
Y.
going to ask you about that. Yeah, I had no.
Yeah. And what I love about it is that it's a huge spreadsheet that is free and available online, and they publish all the primary data. So they
Mm-hmm.
will publish whether for this food we have one sample, one data point, or whether we have 20 data points. So it also helps give you confidence when they say that this is high, medium, or low. Well, they're saying it's low, but they only have one data sample.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're saying this one is low and they have 30 data samples. It can also give you a little bit more confidence in whether they are calling a food medium, high, extra high, low, etc. So it's very transparent, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see all the data points. And so for me, that's how I, in my clinical practice with my colleague, Susie Finkel, who's the other dietitian I work with,
Mm-hmm.
she and I worked together and, really like combed this database and created a very comprehensive handout for our patients that we built up from this. And we kind of go food group by food group and like low, medium, high for veggies and fruits and proteins based on that database, which I think is excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's what we're using in our practice.
Awesome.
There, like I said, but there's other studies out there that have looked at their own stuff and, have come up with low nickel diets that they've used in their research studies and gotten some decent results from, even though some of the foods on their list that they say are high on my list, they come out low, so it's not, we're just all doing the best we can,
Hmm.
with the best available data.
Yeah. And would you say nickel sensitivity is a little bit different from like histamine intolerance, where with histamine intolerance, it's more about like the overall load and how much your body can break down. So we kind of have to
Yeah.
tease out like how many high histamine foods or histamine liberators you can consume in a day before symptoms flare up. But with nickel, is it a little bit different? Like it's just
Yeah.
certain
It's
foods
very
you may or may not react to.
It's not mediated. Like the mechanism of the reaction is very different. Like
Right.
this is an immune system mediated reaction. When the body detects nickel, it launches a white blood cell, immune system response that causes inflammation. It is,
Mhm.
sort of like an atypical food allergy, right? It's not an IgE mediated food allergy, but it's an allergy. It's a food allergy,
Mhm.
but not to the food protein, right? To a metal in the food. Histamine intolerance is a completely different thing, right? Histamine intolerance is hi, I don't have enough of the enzyme DAO to break down preformed histamine in my food. And therefore, when I eat too much histamine, that actually is much more similar to like a lactose intolerance, right?
Mhm.
Which is like I eat too much lactose, I don't have enough lactase, there's too much lactose building up in my GI tract, and then I get a downstream effect from too much lactose, which in that case is diarrhea.
Mhm.
With histamine, it's a histamine intolerance anyway, not a mast cell condition, but a histamine intolerance. It's I ate too much histamine, I couldn't break it down fast enough. Now there's a buildup of histamine in my gut. And what is the downstream effect of histamine in my gut? Maybe cramping, maybe bloating, maybe pain, maybe diarrhea, maybe acid reflux, but it's kind of just like I can't break it down fast enough, which
Right.
mechanistically is more similar to a lactose intolerance.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, that's a good way to explain it. And based on your knowledge, I know we're working with still limited research, but is there any way that people can improve their reaction to nickel if they do have NAS? Anything that they can do?
No.
Supplements, diet changes, improving microbiome, or just
No,
something you
it's
have
an
to?
allergy. It's an
Yeah,
allergy. I mean, it's the same question as like, is there anything you could do to improve your tolerance, like to your peanut allergy? You improve your microbiome? No. Like this
yeah.
is not leaky gut. This is not dysbiosis. This is not, oh, I have a weak immune system. I need to strengthen my immune system. This is an allergy.
Mhm.
You're allergic. I don't know how to reverse allergy. There's no established way to do it. The best that you can do is try to leach as much nickel out of high nickel foods as possible to make them less, likely to provoke a response, which is exactly what that mystery patient of mine did years and years ago by completely like soaking and boiling her oats, in so much more water than they needed to absorb because essentially what she was doing was kind of leaching some of the extra nickel out.
Mhm.
But if you boil spinach instead of sautéing it, that's less nickel. And so there are some cooking methods
Right.
that can
Reduce the
reduce the nickel in
content.
your food, but
Yeah.
you can't reduce your body's reactivity to nickel, to my knowledge.
Hmm. Maybe one day we'll find out how to reverse allergies, but
Yeah, sure. I mean,
so
maybe one day we'll all micromanage our immune systems. I don't know. Our immune systems are getting much less ruly with each passing generation. So we'll see.
fair enough. Okay. Yeah, I did have a few questions that some listeners had sent in. So one of them was whether you can decrease the nickel content of foods through preparation. So you mentioned cooking them in water so that the nickel leaches out and then discarding the water.
Yeah, for some foods that will work, maybe not for all
Mhm.
food.
Okay.
And also, your cookware matters. So I once had a patient, and the way that I figured out that she had a nickel issue was she would get these like scaly rashes on her hands. And she told me that she would get it when she like cooked her foods in like this pan, but not when she cooked them in the other pan.
Hmm.
And she was like, it is the weirdest thing. I'm like, oh, well, that done. I'm like, that's easy. Like,
I get
I was
it.
like, that came out in the first 5 minutes of our call. What are we going to talk about for the next 55 minutes? Yeah, and so the cookware you choose, watch it like maybe using a cast iron pan instead of stainless steel pans, or choosing cookware that doesn't have nickel in it. Or if you cannot avoid nickel in your cookware, then at least not cooking acidic foods in high nickel cookware, because the acid, like a tomato sauce or, something acidic, is more likely to leach nickel out of the pan versus something else. And so, if you can cook things in like Corningware, glass, cast iron,
Mm.
um, better from a nickel perspective.
Okay. What about copper pots and pans?
Oh, I'd have to look that up.
Okay. Maybe, but and then in terms of like canned foods themselves, canned
Yeah,
beans,
so we would have people avoid
yeah.
avoid canned foods. Now we have, like Tetra Packs with, and there's glass jars and like plastic bags of frozen things, like frozen vegetables instead of canned vegetables, or jarred, um, like the fancy glass jars of tuna, or like, instead of, canned tuna. But
Okay.
yeah, the packaging matters. Also, running your water, like depending on what kind of pipes you have, running your tap water for a few minutes in the morning before you use your tap water, because whatever water first thing in the morning has been sitting in the
Mm,
pipes overnight, and you don't know what your pipes are made out of. And so, also, just before you brush your teeth or make your morning coffee or your tea, run
mhm,
the water for a couple minutes. All these things can potentially be helpful.
mhm. Okay. What about filtering water? That's not something I looked into, but I wonder if there's a way
Yeah,
like
it's a good question. I don't know. I
hmm,
don't know what the water filters are filtering, so it's a really good question. That's something I'd really have to look into.
yeah. Okay. And then what are your thoughts on taking vitamin C with meals to decrease nickel absorption? That's something that I've
What
seen.
about absorption? This is it's a contact mucositis. It has nothing to do with absorption. It has to do with contact with the mucosa. When the nickel touches the mucosa, it causes irritation.
Hmm.
This has nothing to do with absorption. So vitamin C has nothing to do with it.
Okay. So that's a myth. That's online. Okay. Cool. So I think we went through a lot here and covered a lot of good points. I guess anything that we haven't talked about that you want to add to this to sort of round out this discussion on nickel for those listening who suspect they might happen.
Look, what I would just say is, if you've been told you have IBS, but you do not respond to any of the typical IBS things, it is one of the many possibilities of what we would consider an IBS mimicker. It is not the only one. It's not even the most common one. However, it is one of them. And certainly, if you have made observations, very clear observations with specific foods as really provoking symptoms,
Mhm.
you're already off to the races. Like that's already like a great place to start. It is not super common, but not impossible. And so definitely something to kind of be in the consideration set for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's the thing with IBS too is just that it is like, a set of symptoms that does overlap with a lot of other conditions. And I think the patients that work with you are very fortunate because they're able to get, access to testing and then, have you as well to kind of coordinate additional investigations if you think that something else is going on. But, maybe other patients living with IBS don't always have that full access to care or, getting the investigation and the testing that they need. And sometimes IBS goes misdiagnosed for a while, and it may be another
Yeah, for sure.
condition.
And then also, if you do decide to try the diet, you're going to know within 2 weeks if it's helping. So, like,
Mhm.
if it's not helping after 2 weeks, it's not it. Like, don't get stuck on any elimination diet for more than 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
Any elimination diet that affects GI symptoms will make itself known in terms of its efficacy quickly.
Yeah.
And don't get too attached to the hypothesis before you've proven it.
Hmm.
Um, and then if you do, get much better, um, then you'll know really quickly. And then you're stuck on a low nickel diet, but at least you'll feel good.
Yeah, exactly. And do you think it's worth it working with a dietitian if you have access, just to make sure not over restricting your diet and getting
Or
enough nutrition because it can be quite restrictive in itself, low
as
nickel.
long as a dietitian knows what they're doing in this space, right? Like, dietitians have different subspecialties and different degrees of expertise.
Absolutely.
And dietitians are as susceptible to bad internet information as anybody else, I'm sorry to say. And so I have a very specific area of expertise. Like, don't ask me about blood sugar management or insulin dosing. Like, don't ask me about hormonal stuff and women's health. Like, I'm GI. That's what I'm really
Mhm.
good at. There are other dietitians who are amazing in other areas, but maybe have never heard of a low nickel diet. And if they Google it the same way you've Googled it, might not be great at giving you the kind of guidance that you need. And so you definitely want to work with someone who knows, who has experience and knows the diets that you are most focused on.
Right. I should have reframed the question as that, but yeah, that makes sense for sure.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Well, where can listeners learn more from you, potentially get in touch?
If anyone wants to see me, I'm available through the New York Gastroenterology Associates website, which is nigahealth.com.
Mhm.
If you go to YouTube, NIGA has a channel where we have a lot of webinars, and I've given some of them on various topics. There's one on IBS mimickers that touches on nickel as well. And so a lot of the webinars that we've given are on YouTube. I have my own website, which is my name, tamaraduker.com, or thebloatedbellywhisperer.com, which has info about my books and just some links to just a few articles that I've written. So, I'm Googleable.
Okay, awesome. I will link those in the show notes as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Tamara. I think I love having these conversations. I think just about things that we need to bring more awareness to, but from an evidence-based lens, and talk about where there also may be gaps in the research and the literature and what we still yet don't know, so that people listening are informed and they feel, maybe, equipped to consider dealing with conditions like this, but as you said, not kind of fall into traps of over restrictive eating, or make things worse in the long term. So I think it was a good balanced conversation and perspective around nickel allergy, and I really appreciate you sharing all your expertise in this area.
Yeah. Thanks for covering it. You're an early adopter.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and hope you have a great rest of the day. For anyone listening, if you have any questions or comments about this episode, you can leave them in the show notes as well, and we will get back to you as well there. So thank you so much, and take care.
You too.
All right.